and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined, as always, by James and Alan. Alan, I'll come to you first this week. How are you doing?
Yeah, peachy, thank you. Very good. Yeah, it's all like looking forward to the end of the season. I'm in fine spirits. With this one game a week suits me. Gives me plenty of time to get up to mischief as you've hopefully seen on the blog today. So yeah, all good.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, sometimes because of Europe and the number of games we've had to kind of switch between recording on a Monday and a Tuesday, and it's always part of the consideration is, has Alan had a chance to fully break down the game yet before we can record, to which the answer is usually, just give me another hour and then we'll be good. So...
Well, it's got a bow on top and little colouring in around the edges. This one, I'll tell you.
James, how are you doing?
Good. I'm glowing in the weather. It's turned. So I don't know what your fancy Celsius would be, but it's over 70 degrees Fahrenheit locally today. So it's just, I think people in Glasgow would call that hot or something. I don't know.
But we would call that taps off, I think.
Yes. It's just a nice, cool day for us. So very enjoyable.
Yeah. Not as enjoyable as what we learned about Alan and his excursion to Vegas one time in the past. We'll not go into it in any great detail, but
isn't there a well-worn phrase about that you should be brought in at this point?
Yes, absolutely, and it will. You're welcome to put that on the table, and I will take note. So yeah, we'll not go any further with that one.
Thank you.
James, I'll come to you first. I have to admit that the Hibs game was it was like trying to chow down on a piece of chewy meat. I thought, watching that game at the weekend, it was kind of... I realise this is a very privileged perspective I come at it from, but I mean, watching some of the games at the moment is a bit of a chore. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but what was your overall impression of the Hibs game at the weekend?
Yeah, I thought the choreness was Hibs, I thought, on this game, and that they were so putrid on the ball. It was disappointing in that respect. And just from a competitive standpoint, meaning that, kind of thought that they were going to give us a better go at it. And I thought a lot of that was because of us. I thought Celtic's pressing and counter-pressing were, particularly counter-pressing, were suffocating. And that's, I think, that game crystallized to me kind of the last 4 or 5 weeks competitively, not only for us and, being zombified in tongue in cheek in some respects in some of these games where our guys are just kind of, going through the motions because they're exhausted. And they had a full week. And we talked about this on the preview show with Martin last week heading into this, that, we expected this to be a real display of the intensity that maybe quite hasn't been there recently. And it also informs, you look at results over the weekend. Bayern Munich lost to Bochum and Leverkusen. So these teams that are still playing this twice a week, they're now running into their fifth month or whatever it is, fourth or fifth month. So they're still being exhausted. And we got a week off, which was really good. And so I think a lot of it had to do with us being juiced up and rested and making it difficult on Hibs. But even above and beyond that, I thought Hibs was pretty poor. So I thought we were really kind of solid. I didn't think it was like a glowing performance. I thought it was a solid one. We'll talk about it maybe about with the subs and that kind of stuff. I thought, when Hibs kind of grew into the game, and that's what we talked about in the preview as well, is that they've got some depth. Like they've got some quality senior players to bring on that can change games for them. And they've been successful in this good run for them. And I thought they actually, started around the hour mark, started to tilt their direction a little bit. And we talk about some of the data that supports that as well. But yeah, overall comfortable, kind of as expected, with happy that we confirmed that we weren't going to have like a sleepwalk through the end of the season potentially, which I didn't think we would, but it's nice to see we won't. And yeah, not great from Hibs.
Yeah, Alan, it was a bit of a strange one, because I think there was certainly I was one of them, but there was a few of us out there who perhaps expected a little bit more of a challenge from Hibs, given this amazing run that they've been on. I think it's something like 13 games unbeaten in the league or something like that, and yeah, they didn't maybe provide quite the challenge that we thought they were going to. What was your impressions of the match?
Well, they kind of did and they didn't. I mean, mainly didn't. I think from a neutral point of view, there was a lot of valid anticipation of this game, and it probably would have been very disappointing from a neutral perspective. Celtic set up in quite an interesting way. I think, and as James has said, they either suffocated Hibs with their pressing and counter pressing very successfully, to the point where, especially in the first half, Hibs passing was just awful. And they really created virtually nothing. In fact, the only chance they created was when they stole 20. Listen, every team tries to do this, right? They stole 20 yards from a throw in, and that got a quick break. And given every team does this, and given there's balls placed around the pitch, you kind of got to be a bit more switched on to that, I would argue. So, if you can get away with it, fair enough. I'm sure we'd be praising Celtic for quick thinking if we'd done that. So, and that was really the only chance that they created. And on the ball, they were terrible, and it wasn't kind of what I expected. Well, ish. I think what we'd learned when we spoke to Liam and when he studied them was that where they've really improved as a side is defensively. So, and they really concentrated on that on the day. They had a fairly compact mid block that we've talked about many times before, which they set up in. They kept two up front who didn't press particularly effectively, I must say. And then you had the back five and then a three. And they were kind of solid, and they kind of did their jobs pretty well. And Celtic kind of huffed and puffed without, But over the 90 minutes, what Hibs have done historically that's given Celtic problems, I wrote about this on Friday, is that Hibs are easily third in the country in terms of the amount of problems they cause Celtic in these matches. In terms of even the most basic thing like average points to XG to packing scores, especially. Just even though Hibs are not like being the third best team in the country, for some reason they always seem to be able to cause Celtic problems. But none of the things that they do in an attacking sense to cause Celtic problems, they did in this game. And I think Gray may reflect that he perhaps put too much emphasis on that defensive solidity. But then, having said that, they kept it to 1-0 till the 90th minute, and all they really wanted to do was keep it to a 0-0, 1-0. And then, as James says, they actually had more attacking options on their bench than we had on ours. Right, so that just gives you a little bit of indication as to where Celtic is at the moment. Now, you could say, well, Bernardo and Forrest are injured, but we've been pretty fortunate. We've managed the squad well enough that we haven't had hardly any injuries this season, and we've only got two at the moment, and they're two more attacking players. But even having said that, they had more options on their bench to bring on and change the game than we did, and they used them quite well, and they opened up a bit in the second half, as James says, and they at least tried, and certainly their packing score was double what it was in the second half to the first half. So whether Gray feels that it was an opportunity missed, that he talked before the game, the usual sort of cliches almost of not having any regrets, leaving everything out on the pitch. I do wonder if he thinks, well, does he have regrets? Were they too cautious? Did they do enough with the ball to cause Celtic problems? There were a few little tactical nuances we'll get into in a minute, but yeah, I think most of the story was about how disappointing they were. Frankly, I thought Celtic were competent and actually, at the end of the game, +3 XG difference. I mean, you can't say fairer than that, really. So it was a comfortable win in the end for Celtic, even though it was still a jeopardy right until the 90th minute.
Yeah, James, some of the tactical nuances Alan's mentioned there, you've mentioned there, what stood out for you in terms of the strengths of the game for us, and maybe some of the things that Hibs were doing wrong that you observed having watched the match?
Yeah, so again, when we talked to Liam Bryce from Hibs Observer last week, and then when we talked about it on Thursday, I think the expectation was that Gray would be relatively smart in how he would set up. And I kind of like, I understand what Alan's saying. I can, there's always that kind of hindsight bias and, hindsight 2020, but I thought they were set up fine. Like they have a good keeper. He's been one of the better keepers in the league. So in that situation going into Celtic Park, if you're Hibs, I mean, the idea that you're going to go toe to toe against a fresh Celtic who lined up the way we did, by the way, with Jota and Maeda and Kuhn, they're going to play a high line against that. I mean, that's, with Bashiri as your main center back, that's kind of nuts. So I thought he set up pretty intelligently, and I thought we did too. Like I thought this was a kind of a balanced game where both teams are set up smartly, and we just have better players, and they couldn't cope, and they had a bad day on the ball. So I didn't really actually sense a lot tactically. You could argue, I think, maybe selection wise, Hibs, like if I was a Hibs supporter, whether or not who he selected, there might be some room for reasonable disagreement there. Like I don't have it, but I'm saying like I could see it. Because I was right. Like their press wasn't all that effective, and I don't really think their front two are well built for that. But it wasn't, so their XG was really poor. But as Alan is apt at saying, and is really important, is the importance of packing scores that he keeps and how they correlate better to performance than even XG. And we talk about this domestically all the time, that teams that will do pretty well between the 18s against us and they just crap the bed in the final third. And there was a number of those sequences with Hibs where they did open us up a little bit in transition, particularly in the second half, and then just crap it when they got inside kind of 40 yards. There was that sequence where I think it was Hoylett who tried to play in what's the older striker?
Cadden, yeah. Well, Cadden, actually. It was the one in the second half. Yeah. He tried a through ball to Cadden. It was a really difficult pass.
Yeah. So, and then there was even a later one, a Hoylett from the left, and it was kind of a reverse diagonal through a little bit of traffic, but it was almost on, like it, and it would have been a clear one-on-one. So they were just off a little bit, even when they did have pretty good sequences. And that's, again, if I'm Gray, like that's what you want. You want to have a fighting chance where they reasonably could have gotten, closer to 1 in XG, which again, pretty much anyone other than Rangers playing at Celtic Park, if you can get up towards 1 in XG, like that's a really good chance at getting a result of some type. So yeah, I don't have a lot of criticism for either manager, really. I thought it was a pretty well coached game, with pretty decent strategy from both sides. You're on mute, Laura. Oh boy, my goodness.
Maybe it would have worked out better if I stayed on mute. But we'll Alan,
we'll be the judge of that.
I know a lot of people who know me in real life would like an actual mute button for me, but the less said about that, the better. Alan, are you on board with what James was saying there about that the managers respectively set up well? Is that what you observed in the statistics and things that you gathered?
Yeah, I think so. As I say, I think just Hibs defensively again solid. I just feel they probably prioritised that. Whether whether you don't know, but whether Gray had emphasised to his team that's what he wanted them to be concentrating on, to stay in the game, which I completely get. They just seem to neglect, whether it was just a bad day or whether they just didn't put enough emphasis on it. I don't know. But I thought a couple of Celtic things were interesting. One of the things, so there's been a couple of good pieces. I know everyone probably feels, and I feel that, I mean, how much Gary Neville does anyone need in their life? But there's been a couple of great pieces on Gary Neville's Overlap channel in the last week or so. I recommend that you watch there's an hour where they get the gang of them, Roy Keane and Jill Smith and all that lot, Ian Wright and stuff. They interview Kasper Schmeichel. And it's really, really interesting because Kasper Schmeichel's a pretty intense, intelligent guy, and he likes to talk. And so you get a lot out of him in that hour that they speak to him for. And it's very, very interesting. And one of the things, and sorry, by the way, and the other thing that you should watch, maybe we'll come to later, given the news in Scotland, is the Jim Ratcliffe interview with Gary Neville. Gary Neville, to be fair, does a brilliant job. He really goes for him, and he goes for him as a fan should, respectfully, but with firm and very pointed questions. And just to see someone like Ratcliffe, squirming like that is a joy to behold. So that was a great piece of interviewing. So check that one out as well. I think they're both free to air. going back to Cassius Michael then, so something which he talked about, because they were talking about goalkeepers in general, and we're talking about, I think Gary Neville showed him the clip of Ebi Martinez, the Aston Villa goalkeeper, where he kind of stands on the ball for a minute, and he's just basically kind of coaxing the opposition. I think it was Aston Villa, doesn't really matter. Coaxing the opposition to dare you to press, like De Zerbi's Brighton used to do. Come and press us, and then we'll then disrupt you with passing. And they were saying to Schmeichel, is that how you play? Do you do that? And he goes, no. He goes, it's Celtic. The centre halves do that. The centre backs do that. And I'd never really thought of it in those terms before. And when people talk about, the centre halves are passing it between themselves, and isn't it tedious? We're just going side to side. Well, it's actually by design, as it turns out. It's actually by design. And I thought this was a game where Hibs were so set in their shape that we were just trying to coax them out all the time. We were being very patient and really just trying to find the moment to really open them up. And I think that's a useful thing for people to have in their minds when they're seeing that, is don't think of it as necessarily a negative thing. Think of it as where are the spaces, where are the gaps, where can we be, where's the movement ahead of the centre backs, etc. Is that ball on? So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I thought it was interesting how Schlupp, who again had a really solid game, he's increasingly inverting, he's increasingly taking up space in the middle of the pitch in the sixth position. I thought that was another interesting feature. Johnson was great again. That was an interesting aspect of it. And they obviously had spotted a couple of things in the goalkeeping. So a lot of praise for Jordan Smith for Hibs. I think, as I pointed out on the show last week, was that he's not particularly amazing. If you look at his numbers, they're not incredible. He's kind of competent. He's just good. He's average, really. And I don't mean damning with faint praise and all that, but that is an upgrade for Hibs in the goalkeeping position compared to the keepers that they've had in recent times. He's just merely competent, and that's a good thing. The last time he was at Celtic Park, all the talk was about Kasper Schmeichel making 8 saves. Well, Smith made 9, and he actually made 8 saves in this game as well. But what was interesting for me was that the number of long shots that Celtic were taking, and I think it was like 50-50 outside, inside the box, which is, even Celtic this season have been trending more towards 70% shots taken inside the box. So it was kind of 50-50 in this match. And I think it was deliberate. I think there's something in Smith's game. I mean, he's not a particularly big goalkeeper. Maybe it's that. You can't get across to the corner as well. But we took a lot of long shots. And I don't think it was because Hibs were particularly brilliant at stopping Celtic getting into those positions, because, Mariah Welsh and Trantis were generally the two holding players. They were kind of outnumbered most of the game because Campbell tended to play a bit higher. So it wasn't as if we couldn't have moved them around or they were closing the space down brilliantly and we were kind of rushing our shots because that was the only option. It wasn't that. We kind of made the decision to do that. And of course, it didn't pay off. I don't think we didn't score from a long shot, obviously. And I think McGregor's was probably the best effort, which I think was one of the first shots in the game in the first opening few minutes. But it was interesting. It was interesting that we'd adjusted our approach, I think, for a tactical reason. I think I thought it was an encouraging sign that we were being smart, even if it didn't work. And then the other thing that didn't work was that we launched every corner right on top of the goalkeeper. And again, he's not a big guy, and he did pretty well. He actually came out and dealt with a lot of balls. So whether it was a misguided approach, you could argue, well, we didn't create anything from it. I don't think we even created any chances from it. But again, at least it shows that somebody's thinking about this, and there is a strategy and there is a plan, and these are tactical nuances that we're seeing come to the fore. So even though none of that was very successful, I'm kind of encouraged that at least it happened. At least that someone's thinking about this, whether that's the Gavin Strachan thing or whatever, I don't know. But so there were the things that I spotted that I thought were positives from Celtic's point of view, even though the execution didn't result in any actual really much XG on the back of it.
Yeah, if you want some real heart attack stuff, just off the back of what Alan said, if you watch that Kasper Schmeichel interview, he goes a step further with this centre-backs passing the ball and suggests that, I think it was at Anderlecht, he said he did it, he essentially they push the full-backs up into midfield and he becomes part of the back three to try and aid in finding these open pockets. And I thought, I can see the logic of that, but I can see Celtic does all over the place absolutely going apoplectic that there's nobody in the goal and that kind of thing. So whether that'll be something that becomes a feature in Celtic's game moving forward or not, I don't know. But it was interesting to hear about nonetheless.
So Laura, he did also address James's criticism head on. Because James talks about him not coming for crosses, not coming for high balls, and he says, "Look, I'm not a goalkeeper that does that." And he goes, "Actually, goalkeepers these days don't tend to do that as much." And he goes, I don't do it because I'm not a particularly tall goalkeeper." So he kind of addressed that head on. Now you might not like the answer, you might not agree with the answer, especially given the context of how Scottish teams play. But I thought it was an honest answer, and it was an interesting one.
Yeah, are you beefing with Kasper Schmeichel? Can we say that, James?
No, I admire his body shape. I can relate to him. So
It's not only is he not very tall, he's particularly wide.
Yeah, we got about the same height, and I don't know. I've probably got about 2 stones on him, but yeah,
fair enough. I mean,
I like a guy with a little paunch. Makes him relatable.
Well, as long as it's not a guy with a little staunch, that's all right. Speaking of which, Alan, James, sorry. I don't know whether there's anything else you want to add about the Hibs game before we go on to talking about the game next week against Rangers. But one of the players that you certainly have been focusing on is Arne Engels this week. What have you made of his performances of late? And I don't know, for me, just to offer my opinion, he's not always doing the spectacular, I would say, but he's certainly found a space and a pocket in the team that he seems to be becoming really comfortable, and he's just being quietly effective for me in a way that is quite satisfying to watch.
Yeah, I think that's the both positive, but also the potential area for concern. And it's not about him. This is in no way a criticism of him, because again, I think he's kind of grown into this season quite a bit, and you can see the improvement. And I think he's definitely become a significant net contributor. I think what I wrote on Monday was more so the compare and contrast of the importance of player profiles relative to the roles that they're being asked and to contribute within a team, and that fit. And that's where I think there's a lot of inefficiency still in the transfer market and how team squads are built. And I think that's central to how like Tony Bloom's doing what he's doing in his clubs, is that more synced up profiles of relative strengths and weaknesses and putting the chess pieces together, so to speak, within the context of the strategy. And so basically what I wrote about was an analysis contrasting him with McAllen, one being, kind of a lower league into Dundee journeyman that we picked up, who I really liked the signing. I thought he was going to be a significant net contributor as a squad player in Scotland in particular, but with questions about whether he had the profile athletically and technically to be able to scale up to be, like a box-to-box 8 on a Celtic team competing in Europe. Like I thought that was probably going to be a bridge too far. But domestically, he's done very well. And there's caveats there. He's mostly been as a sub. He's had extra minutes against, kind of lesser opponents like Ross County, et cetera, et cetera. Engels has been getting better, but he's still not performing at a level that you would say is like, wow. You know what I mean? Like a wow Celtic attacking midfielder. And I think that's, we'll get into some of the more of the fun about the potential takeover at Ibrox, theoretical takeover at this point. But as I've been writing more and more and digging more and more into Bloom and the potential at Hearts, there's these competitive threats coming. I think Bloom being the more likely of the two at this point. Not that the 49ers thing isn't going to happen. So when you look at our peer clubs in Europe, when they have a record signing and someone who's going to be a really successful young transfer that spends a couple of years and then goes on, the way that they hop up into that 40, 50, 60 million euro sale price is someone that's wow. Someone that wows you. They come into the role and they fit with what they're being asked, and their relative strengths and weaknesses of how they play are like tailor made for what they're asked to do in the team. And my observation is that's just, to my opinion, that's not Engels. Like I don't think that is the case, and I think he's done a tremendous job adjusting. And I think there's like this imperfect adjustments going on, both from the way he's being utilized and the way he's performing. But I just don't think a lot of what he's asked to do is necessarily natural for him and what his relative strengths and weaknesses are. So again, it's not to say that he's going to be a bad player or that he's not contributing materially. It's, for a record signing for Celtic as a midfielder who's 21 coming out of the Bundesliga, he should be kicking ass. Like, obviously just coming in and dominating the league. Like, that's the level he really, in my mind, like that's, if this was done properly, that's how it kind of could work. And that's the other thing I wrote about in the chat on huddlebreakdown.com was, 21's not young anymore, right? It was like 15% of players that played 300 minutes in the Champions League this season in the league phase were between ages 17 and 21. Okay. So, a lot of teams are like Sturm Graz had, the guy just got called up to the Scotland team. He's 21 at right back. I think he's at right back. They had 4 guys that played, at 21 or younger, a lot of minutes in the Champions League. So it's not, young to be 21 anymore. Like, that's normal starter in the Champions League or Europa League at teams that we're kind of competing with. So that's basically, and that's, people are still, well, maybe he should be at the 6 now. He should replace McGregor. Like, no one really knows what he is yet still. And to me, again, it's not critical of him. It's that the role relative to his profile is still kind of nebulous. And to me, that's problematic. If you spend $2 million on a guy that's, hopefully it works out, that's one thing. But if it's like your premier signing and you're pushing the boat out for a guy, that's less than ideal.
Yeah, Alan, James makes a good point here in that when you're outlaying a significant amount of cash, no matter what amount of cash it is, but in Celtic's case, like a transfer record fee, you would imagine that the manager who wants to bring him in and the coaching staff who want to attain him have an idea of exactly how they're going to use him in the team, how he's going to improve the team. And if you're breaking the bank for this guy, that he's going to, as James says, take us to another level kind of thing. What do you think's happened here? Has it been a case of Rodgers has brought him in with the direct intention of changing how he plays? Has he brought him in thinking he was one thing and then realising he's another? Or is there something else going on that we're maybe not aware of? What's your assessment of that?
So I think not uncommon on hopefully this program is that everything, I can't disagree with anything James has said in terms of it being a rational perspective given the evidence. I couldn't argue with any of it as being a valid interpretation of the evidence as it stands today. Okay, I guess I've got a slightly different interpretation of the same evidence, and I think it really comes down to, which I think was obliquely the nub of James's article based on the title, is this £11 million transfer fee, which Engels had no hand or part in, right? That's not on him. As I think as James referenced there, if Engels was signing in the similar price range as Matt O'Reilly at $1.5 million, or Dyson Maeda at $1.4 million, or even Rio Hatate, who I think was just about $3 million, I think we'd all be pretty pleased with ourselves and pleased with Engels at this point, and it probably would have been almost unequivocal, other than we're still not quite sure what he is, which I think I completely accept that, and I agree with that. But that's not his fault. Right? That is not his fault. He did not ask to be an £11 million player. Now, if we want to dig into that for a second, I do still think it's surprising that Celtic paid £11 million to a middle to low ranking German club for a player who was actually just about a squad player last season, as in he started a load of games at the beginning of the season and then really became a sub for the second half of the season. So even though they had a really good season, I mean, Augsburg finished like 11th in the Bundesliga, which is an incredibly good season for them. He wasn't integral to that at the end. He was mainly used as a substitute. He was in the squad virtually every week, and he came on most weeks, but he wasn't a starting player. And when he did start, he was used in a variety of different positions. So has the club overpaid? I think they have. I really do. Is that Engels' fault? No, it isn't. Right. So let's put that to one side then. So what have we actually got? I think we've got something which Rodgers has spoken about in terms of wanting that athletic, reasonably tall, strong, box-to-box number 8. I think that's the goal in having him. But I still come back to what I wrote about 3 or 4 months after he joined, which is that he's never played in a set position. He's played in a team that often played 4-4-2 long ball, and he's never played in a team that plays more than once a week, right? And he's never played a full season either. On top of that, so you got to factor. So although James says 21 is not young, it is young if you've not done any of those things and you've not experienced them before. So he may not be old or he may be old in years compared to some teenagers that are ripping it up in the Champions League, but he's not old in experience. And he's certainly not old in experience of playing for a club like Celtic and the demands of that. And the demands of that in a particular style of midfielder where you're expected to dominate the ball, to keep possession, and to do your defending diligently and to contribute massively to the attacking third as well. None of these things he's had experience of before. So I think we have to, accept that is the case and therefore allow him the space to develop those skills. And if he's not improving, then I think we can turn around and say, well, come on, lad, you're not improving. Where's the discernible? But I think even as James says, he is improving. Now, it might not be to the level that one might expect of an £11 million player. But again, I come back to that's not his fault. So I'm kind of minded, and I think back to Matt O'Reilly, who came in, looked great, faded a bit, ended up being a sub, came on for a bit. That was his first 6 months. Rio Hatate was the same. Exploded into the team, couple of goals in the derby, great goal at Hearts, faded a bit, and then by the end of the season looked a bit knackered, was on the bench, right? And then, as they had a full season, pre-season with the squad under their belts, they were a little bit more resilient, they were fitter, stronger, more integrated in the second season. So I'm not declaring defeat on Engels anywhere near yet. I still think, mainly because of his attitude, mainly because of his work rate, his natural, obvious intelligence as a young man, his attitude, his work rate, all the professionalism things. If you want to box all those things up in a little bow, I think he seems to have all those things. Therefore, I've got hope that he will evolve into the sort of box-to-box midfield player that Rodgers wants. Whether Celtic will realise an appreciable resale value commensurate to his original fee, I don't know. Is he worth more now than when we signed him? I actually doubt it. But again, that's not on him, and that shouldn't be on him. I think the club overpaid, but I think there's probably a very good player there, and we have to just give him the time and space to grow.
I do worry, just to counter the point about potential overpaying, I do worry though that £11 million to us is transfer record breaking. It's an insane amount of money to pay for a footballer. But if you're talking about basically any of the big 5 leagues in the world, it's not a lot of money to pay. Maybe in the grand scheme of things, it's a fair assessment of his value in the world market. It's just about whether we can actually afford to operate in that market and pay £11 million for a player that isn't going to come in and completely change our team the way that he wouldn't completely come in and change a Brighton or change a Newcastle or anybody who could afford to throw away £11 million on a player that might never work. So it's about maybe reassessing whether that's a wise move for us to do again in the future, because in the past we have paid large amounts of money for players that have come in and been game changing. Edouard, Dembele, players of that ilk who have then gone on to make his money as well. So I think it's maybe just about trying to readdress that balance.
Sorry, Laura. So Edouard, again, Edouard spent a season being mainly used a lot as a sub. but we saw enough of him to pay 9 million, and then we did. But we knew exactly what we were getting, and he developed and he grew. And no reason to suspect it might not be the same with Engels. I think to back up what you're saying, I think you're right in the general point you've made, but also I think what I'm slightly forgetting is I think he'd already been in the Belgian squad. Now that's probably why we've had to pay this. The fee that we've had is that had he not been in the Belgian full squad, I suspect we could make a case for saying we overpaid, but maybe that was the factor.
Yeah, and just to stress again, the point of my intended point, what I tried to communicate in the article was none of this was a criticism of Engels or saying that McCown is better than Engels or which player is better than the other. I mean, I think it's prima facie that Engels is the better player, the more talented player, the more athletic player. But the reality is that they're performing in the same neighborhood domestically against the similar opposition. They're in the neighborhood. I'm not, they're kind of, plus or minus close to one another. And my point is and that's a credit, I think, to McGowan. First of all, I mean, I credit him, and that's partly because I think his profile for the role that we're asking him to play is ideal. It really makes a lot of sense for us to be deploying him the way that we are. So it's about the fit of the profile of the player, the relative strengths and the weaknesses for the role that they're being asked to use. That's what the kind of the undergirding of my piece was about, and kind of trying to think about, well, what if we did spend 11 million on a McGowan? I mean, a guy who actually does fit his freaking role, and we have an actual cohesive, smart approach to recruitment to do this. Then you get the explosion. Then that's the guy you spend 11 million on and sell for 50 because he's coming to Celtic to be a superstar because he fits so well and it makes so much sense. That's kind of what I was trying to get at, because with these threats impending coming to our shores, that's what these people are going to be better at doing than what we've shown. And that's what I was kind of trying to hint at through the piece. Was just, we need to hit on these better than we've been. Eat is a whole different conversation, but we have a series of issues that suggest that we're not profiling properly. And that's with these competitors coming in. And this is what I've said about the 49ers, that they're not, rocket scientists, but they just have to be competent, because we haven't been doing it competently. And that would be a competitive advantage.
Yeah, we will get on to the 49ers and the game at the weekend in a second.
They just signed a linebacker, Laura. You didn't know that?
I don't even know what is a linebacker. I've no idea.
I don't know if that's true or not. I have no idea.
I think I know what a quarterback and a wide receiver are, but that's about it. So who knows? But before we do that, Alan, I just wanted to take a little bit of time in the middle of the show to talk about the content that is available on the Huddle Breakdown Substack, because we touch on a little bit of it during this show, which is free to air, obviously. Some people might not be fully aware of everything that's available in terms of the content that both you and James provide, some of the specials that you can get access to, and the extra interviews that you do with some experts in their respective fields. Why don't you tell the folks who are listening and watching a little bit about what they can expect to find on the Huddle Breakdown Substack?
Yeah, no, listen, thanks everyone for listening. But as I say, the intention was always basically to give people pretty much what we'd already always provided, which is kind of one podcast a week. So that's still there, but there's just so much more really we wanted to do, and that's what's really on the huddlebreakdown.com site. So just last week we released a special interview with Thomas Grunemark. Thomas is someone who has worked with many clubs in around the world, in fact, as a throw-in coach, which sounds incredibly niche, and it is. I'm not sure there's any others that do specifically what he does, but he's done it to great effect, most notably with Liverpool, in terms of, demonstrably contributing to clubs winning things, in terms of improving their attacking performance and their defensive performances, and this is, as I say, observable at a number of clubs. Midtjylland be another one. Union Saint-Gilloise. You're noticing a theme here. It would be another one, but I think Liverpool is probably the most famous one. But he'll go and work for any club, even at sort of junior level, and you'll adjust his fees accordingly. He assures me. So, but anyway, but this guy, you'll be. Another reason for listening to the interview is because it's 90% him talking and not very much of me and James, because he's an incredibly smart and engaging kind of guy. I called him a genius, and I don't use that term lightly. You'll hear a little bit about some other achievements in his life, some of the other skills that he has as an individual and as a person, some of the things that he learns and the way he develops himself. An extraordinary individual. And as I say, just the fact that somebody has taken an aspect of football that is under analysed, really, but nevertheless is significant. I think there's an average of 40 throw-ins per match. So you're either got the ball and you've got an attack opportunity, or you're defending it, right? So it covers both defensive and attacking situations. And he's literally developed a science about the art and science of throw-ins from scratch. He's developed theory, he's developed best practice, he knows how to coach it, and he's got demonstrable results. So he's modelled it. Right, he's got the full gamut of scientific rigor, and on top of communication, coaching, all the human skills element of it is all there. It's just phenomenal. So strongly recommend that, and hopefully you'll find other interviews that we've done with previous guests equally engaging, and that's really the sort of standard that we set for those interviews. And then we'll try, and James and I will usually do a long form piece once a week each as well on top of that. And then we've got the Thursday podcast, which with Martin Murphy as the host, and that's really a much longer show, frankly. And we call it extra time because we try and get more in depth into the topics that we touch on here, like the Engels thing. We could go on for 40 minutes talking, get really into the detail, whatever topics you like. So if you really love what we do and you want more of it, that's definitely the sort of show for you. And we may have some incredible surprises coming for you. I can't say any more than that, just in case. But yeah, more good stuff to come.
Yeah, 100%. Listen, I'm very ignorant when it comes to a lot of the analytics and stats stuff until I joined this pod, and even still, I'm learning a lot. I watched that, and it made that point that you're talking about, Alan, the fact that there's so many significant parts of the game that are under-analysed or thrown away as not important, that if you take the time to get into the nitty-gritty of it, you can really build an advantage for yourself that other clubs don't have. And I would really encourage anybody to go and watch that. Although, James, I'm a bit upset because I don't think Alan's ever called you or I a genius, has he?
Not to my knowledge. I have not heard those words before from anyone. To be fair to Alan,
as I always say, when the evidence changes, I will change my opinion.
Oh, it's a dagger to the heart, but we'll carry on.
I forget it. It was Pat something, a famous old-time comic, used to say, "I am a genius of myself." So that's my claim to fame. That's my one genius, I'm a genius of myself.
I'll take that. Speaking of geniuses, let's talk about the folks that have decided to look into investing in Rangers. Let's talk about the 49ers. James, I'll come to you as they are your compatriots, I think. I'm assuming they're American, but I don't actually know.
They're out on that left coast, those California hippies out there in San Francisco. We don't really deal with those types of people in where I live.
Yeah, since we last spoke, it's moved on a little bit in terms of, again, still not a done deal, but looks a little bit more likely than it did the last time we spoke. What's your assessment of the current situation as far as you can assess for where we are with a potential takeover with him and what it might mean for Rangers, obviously?
Yeah, the only thing that's changed, and Alan will probably mention some of the details, is that as the news emerges, it opens up the likelihood of what's always the hard part with these kinds of transactions, which is the details. You have to negotiate the specifics, and that's why getting into the final stage, even if they are in the final stages, whatever that means, there's parts of the final stage potentially of due diligence. these transactions come at a specific price, and if the facts on the ground shift because of due diligence, when you've got a lot of parties involved, which when you have a fragmented board or shareholder base as Rangers do, then it's kind of like herding cats to a degree. Everyone's got to you got to get to a threshold where people come to an agreement, and when you have a bunch of different parties, that can be challenging, especially as things change. So that's kind of been my posture the whole time. Like, I understand why someone would be interested. I think it's reasonable that someone would be interested. It seems reasonable that the people that are major shareholders at Rangers would be interested, but coming to an actual deal at the price that's going to get it done, and these are not people that are involved in charity in this regard, meaning that when you're talking about financial people getting into these types of transactions, they're not doing it thinking, oh, well, because a guy wants 25 pence per share, we're going to just give it to him. No, well, it's going to be a negotiation. And that's about leverage. It's about interest. It's about being willing to walk away. You can go back and
They don't do that, Alan. They don't do that, Alan, do they? They don't do walking away. No. As far as I'm aware, anyway, that's what they say.
Yeah. So that's, regardless of what one's viewpoint, and I certainly have my own on the current U.S. president, he did write a book called The Art of the Deal. And it's funny because he keeps deploying the same tactics over and over again, and it just keeps drawing people's hair on fire every time he does the same exact thing, the same technique. Big offer, walk away, make all the histrionics with it. He's just applying it to world geopolitics, which is like insane, but it's in his book. So this is the kind of negotiating tactics that people will deploy in these kind of situations to try to get the best deal possible. So I suspect the 49ers enterprise group, if they're going to commence this deal, are going to use every piece of leverage that they can get to get to the price as low as possible. And the people at Rangers will try to get it as high as possible. That's how these things work. And then it ultimately comes down to who's got the leverage and who's got the biggest incentives for a transaction to occur. I think that's everything I'm hearing is shifting towards the 49ers enterprises, in the sense that, the people at Rangers need this deal more than the people at the 49ers group.
Yeah, Alan, I was just about to say that exact point. I don't imagine, from the little that I know of the current Rangers' financial situation, that they're in a very strong bargaining position. They will have to go with the best offer they can get if it secures the future of the club, I would imagine.
Well, again, the best offer you can get, but people have sunk a lot of money, and these are. You remember, most of the shareholders that we're talking about here, that James mentioned, this disparate group, the highly fragmented ownership structure that there is in place. Not all, but some of these people are genuine fans. But nevertheless, if they've sunk their family's wealth into this, they're not going to necessarily be able to walk away, as much as they love the club or not. They may not be able to afford to walk away. And the ones that have put money in for other reasons beyond the love of the club, they'll be even less likely to walk away with a sort of offer. But you're absolutely right in what you say in terms of this is a very, very distressed company. Breaking news today is that the club, the company, it's the same thing, has lodged a charge, essentially, securitizing future cash flows from transfer tranches. So they've sold players. When you sell a player, it usually gets paid over. It's usually 3 tranches. Unless you negotiate to get it all in one go, like Celtic did with Tierney. The Arsenal paid the 25 million up front. That's very unusual. Normally it's split over tranches. So they've securitized future transfer fee tranches with a lender of last resort, Macquarie Bank. Lender of last resort means you don't really go there unless you absolutely have to.
It's either them or some guy down the corner named Vito.
Well, exactly, and it probably not a quite a thin line between them, if I'm honest. And what does that mean? What does that mean in real terms? It means that there is some kind of liquidity shortfall within the company. Now we're still a long way from season ticket money pouring in, so that has to be a massive concern. Now, from a takeover perspective, now this news is hot off the press today. I say hot off the press. If you see it in a newspaper or hear it on any sort of Rangers podcast, I'll be astonished. But let me know if you do, because it probably just won't be discussed. And but what it will serve to do, it will serve to further put pressure on those wishing to sell. It will further potentially deflate the price of the company in the marketplace for any would-be buyer. But there's plenty of reasons why that would be the case anyway. I mean, this is a company in its various guises that has been loss-making for around about 40 years. That's a fact, right? It never made a profit for 40 years. It's currently observably, and indeed, by the admission of their own senior executives, undergoing an austerity drive to get costs down, to get nearer to revenues. That's a fact. Why would you do that? Because you're losing money, and you're not making enough money to cover your costs. But in terms of if you were looking to take over this company and you're looking at future revenue streams, we've lost the automatic Champions League qualification spot next season. Celtic, if and when and if they win the championship in Scotland, will have to go through at least one qualifier, and the second place team will have to go through multiple. And the way it's looking at the moment with the coefficient points and how they drop off, and it's a 5-year rolling kind of average, if you like, or a 5-year aggregation. So each year, other years fall off, is that that's not looking good for Scotland in future years to get even a second Champions League spot at all, right? So if you're going to gamble on getting access to Champions League riches, that's a big risk to take. How do you increase revenues? Can you increase the size of the stadium? The cost of making adjustments to that stadium in Govan on any meaningful basis, i.e. increasing capacity, let's say, to match Celtic's, is just going to be unfeasibly large. I mean, you look at Crystal Palace are going to build one new stand. Now, that's in London, I grant you, but one new stand is around about 100 million, okay? And look at how much it's cost Everton to build their new stadium. It's about 800 million. 2 billion for this fantasy dome that Manchester United are supposed to be building. But you get my point. Even one stand, which would be effectively be what you'd need, even if you just filled in the corners at Ibrox, to get parity with Celtic. There's no way in the world they're going to be able to borrow 100 million. There's no way any private equity group is going to put 100 million into that, with the hope of getting any return in a 3 to 5 year period, which is what private equity normally looks for a return on. So that's again, those are just facts. An opinion based on fact is that you could raise commercial revenues. Well, again, look at the history of this company that's been in court with virtually every commercial partner over the last few years. That's the football commercial industry is like any other specialist industry. Even at the global level, it's a village. Everybody knows everybody. The reputation of a company is known. The Rangers have tried to stiff multiple, not one, but multiple kit manufacturers and dealers. There's only so many of these people in the world that do this stuff, right? The word gets around. Their name is mud in that respect. So growing commercial revenues could happen over the long term. But as a short term, that's going to be a big boulder to push uphill. Again, another opinion is, okay, listen, fantastic results in Europe, but what is the asset value of that squad? They've been actually reducing the cost of the squad. They've been reducing how much they're spending on wages, meaning there's only so much they can charge for these players anyway, because some of them are not as on big wages as the likes of the Kents and the Goldsons and all that used to be on. The Igamans and the Jefties and those kind of players are not on anywhere near the wages that those players were on. Therefore, there's a limit to the asset value you can squeeze out of those players, even if you did rate them to be the Galacticos that the Daily Record would tell you that they are. So again, the thought that an investor could come in and quickly flip a load of players to get some much needed revenue, I think that's fanciful to say the least. And then you just come to the competitive environment and the threat environment, which is Celtic. What is the gap to Celtic? Well, it's enormous, both in terms of, revenues, commercials, and the manager, the playing staff. It's a huge ask to bridge that gap and therefore get access to other revenue streams. So this is not me saying this isn't going to happen, and this is not me saying there isn't genuine interest. What the other major development that we had this week, apart from the further evidence of the distressed nature of this company, was that Nick Harris wrote a piece in Nutmeg magazine, which he's also put on his own sporting intelligence site, which I strongly recommend you read, because Nick Harris is a proper heavy duty investigative journalist. He's covered a lot of FIFA corruption scandals. He's looked at biddings for World Cups, for example. He's all across the Manchester City story in their kind of financial legal war with the English Premier League. He's a proper investigative journalist, and he's had a look at this story, and he couldn't get anybody, and I mean nobody, stateside to say a word about this. Now, you can read into that what you want, but his conclusions from the digging that he's done was that, yes, there is interest. Yes, there are people that are wanting to do this. Is it the 49ers? There might be people who do work for the 49ers or have worked for the 49ers or who know somebody at the 49ers, but is it actually the 49ers? Question mark. We don't even know if that is the case. Therefore, we don't know who these people are, how much money they've got behind them, what their budget is, what their ability to, buy out, whether it's a majority or 100% shareholding. We don't know any of those things. That's not to say it's not going to happen. It's not to say it's not possible. All these things are possible, but there's an awful lot of question marks. And my reason for going on about this is mainly because of the impact, as James said, I think of in terms of the competitive threat to Celtic, in terms of our own environment that we operate in, but also just because of how badly served we all are, particularly Rangers supporters, by the way, but the lack of, balanced, in-depth coverage that this gets in the Scottish press. And Nick Harris is the first person who's written about this at length who isn't, a fanboy, who isn't invested in Rangers and wanting the best possible outcome and the sunniest possible scenarios to be painted about what this could mean. So I think, that to me is important, because, as I say, this is an important deal potentially for Scottish football. So that's the reason for the interest in it. As I say, not to say it's not going to happen, not to say there isn't interest there, but there's a huge number of questions. And what Nick points out is that no deal has been agreed. There is no deal even for a majority shareholding agreed. Due diligence, as we all know, is only just begun. Due diligence is not box ticking. It's not filling out legal forms. It means that whoever the consortium are that are looking to buy this are going to look at every aspect of the performance of this business in detail using their own people. They will not just accept what's being told to them by either the media in Scotland or people that work at Ibrox. They will do this themselves, right? That's not to say they will find anything particularly onerous or what have you. But the point is that this all has to be gone through. And until all that's been done and an agreement is reached, it's just a potential. And I'm sure these people are looking at many opportunities to squander to invest their hard-earned money. So that's where we are. But I think it's important that somebody counters the absolute shite that is being spouted in the likes of the Daily Record, where if you read that or you read certain Rangers podcasts, even with journalists involved, where you get the impression this is a done deal. It's a done deal. It's going to happen. A significant investment is going to be made in the team. And as supporters, we all want to hear that. That's what we want to hear. So it's a compelling message to give. But as far as anyone can establish, that isn't actually where we are. It's not to say it won't get there. It's not to say it won't happen. But to paint it in that way is misleading, and it's disingenuous, I would say. And I'm being as polite as I possibly can be. So plenty to go, I think, on this. But it may happen, and if it does, what's Celtic's reaction to it? How does it help raise or change the profile of football in Scotland? it could certainly make it more interesting. If it made it more interesting and made it more competitive, does that then generate more sponsorship or investment, et cetera, et cetera? That would be generally a good thing, right? So this could be positive, but please be honest about where we are.
Yeah, I'm going to say 3 words to Backroom Andy if you're watching editing this. Clip that up. Love it. Always love a wee rant from, I say a rant, a realistic check-in from Alan on the current situation across the way. And hello to any of the Blue Nose persuaded people who are on here to call us obsessed or whatever. We are merely discussing the potential impact on our club of the supposed biggest competitor in our league potentially getting investment. Who knows whether that will happen? It will be exciting to watch. Let's switch a little bit, James, just for the last little bit of the podcast. Want to do a little bit, I know you and Alan and Martin will do a much more in-depth preview on Thursday or Friday, whenever you record, of the game coming up at the weekend. But I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss it a little bit here first. Now, Rangers are coming off the back of a very impressive, it has to be said, win against Fenerbahce away from home in the Europa League. The effect of that on their domestic performance is yet to be borne out. Has Barry got Brendan in his back pocket, I guess is what I'm asking.
Clearly.
Yeah, well, I was going to jump in on Alan's comment about the coefficient, because when Barry takes him to the Europa League Championship this season, that
coefficient monkeys go.
That's right, could have a material impact on that coefficient. But
well, they've not got Aaron Ramsey taking a penalty for them this time, so you never know.
Right. So we talked about around the festive period derby about how it really, because Alan and I think relative to the ecosystem within the Celtic world at the time, were amongst the more concerned. Not that we were like thinking we're going to get our asses kicked 3-0, but we were like, yeah, this is kind of setting up where, we're demotivated. It doesn't mean as much to us. This really means a lot to them. They're at home. If they're going to keep this at least a title challenge, they really need this. We'd played like every other day for 6 weeks at that point. So there was I thought a reasonable kind of runway for that to be a tough game is kind of what we thought, I think, Alan, if I'm speaking for you there, but correct me if I'm wrong. Certainly didn't see the way it would turn out. This is the opposite of that, right? So, we've got our manager out there peacocking a little bit. We got a full week of rest, and they have a huge game Thursday against, a good team, a tough team that's going to give them a go at Ibrox. And then they got to turn around playoffs on Sunday, an early Sunday. So that's a quick turnaround for them. And they've played a lot of games. They've continued along, and that's got that one little break because they made the last 8 or the highest 8 within the Europa League league play. So they kind of got that bye, so to speak, in the next round. But they're right back at it now. They're back into the hamster wheel of potential fatigue. And so it's going to be a big ask for them to come to Celtic Park and to put in a performance. So all things considered, we should kick their ass. And we should. That's what should happen on Sunday. And that's the baseline. Now we judge from that. Because that's obviously what we hope, but it's not to say it's going to happen. And this will come down to, I think, the tactical matchup, because one of the reasons that I think we were surprised at how poorly the game went in January was because they played the Bruges script that I had talked about for months, and a modified version of that, and really gave us problems. So, Rodgers kind of hinted at the tactical battle and how they've got some new things up their sleeve. Maybe, I don't know. He's intimating at that maybe to address some of these issues. So that's why I'm saying, like, we should come out and play really well. And we've got almost all of the things that we didn't have going for us in January, I think, are now kind of flipped the other direction. And the game still doesn't mean anything from a league perspective from us, but we've got the kind of, bad taste in the mouth, so to speak. So it'll be interesting if the players have the same acidity in their mouth as the manager seems to have, and whether they'll come out blazing like we hope they will.
Yeah, Alan, there's always a little bit of me that as bad as Rangers have been playing domestically, if the last time we faced them, they came out the better, there's a little bit of me that can't quite enjoy it as much as I normally would, because they still get the better of us. One thing I'll say about Brendan Rodgers is he doesn't come out talking the way he's been talking this week unless he's really sure that he's going to get the better of his opposition. Is that what you expect this weekend? Are we in a stronger position going into this game than the one we did go into in January? I assume you agree that Rangers are certainly in a weaker position than they were in January.
I mean, certainly, obviously, the league table would suggest that, but because really they're not expected to win, because they've got virtually zero chance of, or 0.1%, I think, if you look at Opta, a chance of winning the league. This is the situation in which their players seem to excel. When they're not under pressure, when there are limited expectations upon them, and when they're playing a team that's going to dominate the ball. That is actually the recipe for when that team plays well, and it's befuddling to their own supporters, because clearly what you're seeing every Saturday after, and Wednesday, what have you, every week, is you got an idea what the actual raw ability of these players are, and therefore you're left with the conclusion it's a kind of mentality thing, and in that when the pressure's off and when they're not being asked to dominate the ball, dominate the game, that seems and it's weird that it's a collective thing, that seems to be the catalyst for that group of players to actually play really good football. So this is the situation that potentially we do face on Sunday. So I wouldn't be overly optimistic on that basis. I think we need to be very careful not to. We certainly shouldn't be complacent because of that. They'll as I say, this is a team set up for exactly this kind of game. Not to say that they'll win, they beat us, and then the league title's under threat, because they're just as likely, if they beat us, to then lose the next game at home to Kilmarnock. That's the point. That's exactly how they've performed all the way kind of through the season, whoever it is they play. So on a macro level, I'm not particularly concerned, because again, this is a team that's not shown itself capable of week in, week out, winning Scottish Premier League matches. But they have been capable of turning up to places like Celtic, not having the ball, not having any expectations on their performance, and then turning on quite unexpectedly good performances. So it's almost worse having something that's unknown and unpredictable than it is to have something that's good but predictable, that you can plan to play against. We just don't know what we're going to get. We don't know how kind of strong they're going to play. And I think I wouldn't even worry about the fact that they've played on Thursday to Sunday, because we've seen in the past that doesn't seem to matter. They can miraculously find the energy levels, even with a quick turnaround like that. So I wouldn't even count on that, to be honest with you. So I'm not quite as brazen as Brendan, I'll have to say.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, I'm not either. I just, it seems like that's the baseline that's being set from kind of the Celtic perspective. And like, I get it this time. I thought the support in aggregate were way over their skis heading into the January derby. And that's kind of what we talked about heading into. I was like, whoa, geez, people are really confident. A lot of 3-0, 4-0 in our favor going around at the expectation side. I get that confidence this time. I'm not agreeing with it, because I agree with you, Alan. Like, until I see us come up with a game plan that deals with the Bruges script, and and part of the risk is, well, maybe Barry goes out with something totally different. I mean, who knows? But if he's not a complete lunatic who'll have watched the game from multiple times from January, so I suspect it'll be some form of that. And we've got to prove it. We can do something to get that, because it's been a problem all season against decent level opposition. There's certainly good enough to present that level. So yeah, I didn't want to make it sound like I'm like, oh, this is a layup. There's a lot of, that's what the peacocking suggests. So we'll see. I hope he's right. I hope manager's right.
One thing we can guarantee is that Barry will be blazered, brogued, and club tied up to the hilt. So, we'll see what becomes of that on Sunday. Alan, James, it's been a pleasure as always. If you enjoyed listening to this, please obviously consider looking at the other content that we provide elsewhere. And we will see you again next week.